Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates played with dolls, she was taking apart old radios in her father's garage, trying to understand how electricity flowed through the tiny components. Her hands were always dirty with grease, and her mind was always racing with questions about how machines worked. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah's passion for mechanics was often met with raised eyebrows. Her high school guidance counselor suggested she consider nursing or teaching, careers that would be more suitable for a young lady. But Sarah had her heart set on something bigger. She wanted to work on aircraft, the most complex machines humans had ever built. After graduating high school with top honors in mathematics and physics, Sarah enrolled in an aviation maintenance program at a technical college. She was one of only 3 women in a class of 45 students. The instructors were supportive, but some of her classmates made it clear they thought she was wasting her time. They would make jokes about how she would never be strong enough to handle the heavy components or work the long hours required in aircraft maintenance. Sarah proved them wrong by graduating at the top of her class. Her knowledge of electrical systems was exceptional, and her attention to detail was unmatched. She could diagnose problems that stumped even her instructors, and her practical skills were far beyond what anyone expected from such a young technician. When she applied for positions at various aviation companies, Sarah faced rejection after rejection. Some employers were honest about their concerns, telling her that their work environment was rough and not suitable for women. Others simply said they had filled the position, even though she could see job postings for the same roles weeks later. Finally, after 6 months of searching, Sarah received a call from Lockheed Martin. They were expanding their F-35 Lightning maintenance program and needed skilled technicians. The hiring manager, Robert Chen, was impressed by her technical knowledge during the phone interview and invited her for an in-person assessment. The assessment took place at a military base where several F-35 seconds were stationed. Sarah walked into the hangar, feeling both excited and nervous. The F-35 Lightning was the most advanced fighter jet ever built, packed with cutting-edge technology and complex systems. Working on these aircraft was the dream of every aviation mechanic. Robert introduced Sarah to the maintenance team. There were 12 men, all experienced mechanics who had worked on various military aircraft for years. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity and skepticism as they looked at the young woman who might become their colleague. The team leader, Mike Thompson, was a veteran mechanic with 25 years of experience. He had graying hair and calloused hands that told the story of decades spent working on aircraft engines and electrical systems. Mike shook Sarah's hand firmly, but his expression remained neutral. "We'll see how you handle the real work," Mike said. "Book knowledge is one thing, but these birds require a different level of skill." Sarah was given a small toolkit and assigned to shadow different team members throughout the day. She watched as they performed routine maintenance checks, replaced components, and ran diagnostic tests. The F-35 systems were incredibly complex, with thousands of sensors and computer-controlled components that had to work in perfect harmony. During lunch break, Sarah noticed the other mechanics gathering around Mike's workstation. They were looking at her small toolkit and making comments she couldn't quite hear, but their tone was clearly mocking. One of them picked up her tools and examined them with exaggerated interest. "Look at these tiny screwdrivers," laughed Dave, a mechanic in his 40s. "What's she planning to fix with these? Maybe the pilot's sunglasses?" Another mechanic, James, joined in. "I bet she's never even seen a real aircraft engine before. These fancy jets aren't like the lawnmowers she probably worked on in college." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she didn't respond. She had faced this kind of treatment before and had learned that the best response was to let her work speak for itself. She quietly finished her sandwich and prepared for the afternoon session. The afternoon brought a more challenging task. Robert wanted to see how Sarah would handle troubleshooting a complex electrical problem. One of the F-35 seconds had been experiencing intermittent failures in its communication system. The problem was frustrating because it didn't happen consistently, making it difficult to diagnose. Mike assigned Sarah to work alongside Tom, an experienced electrical specialist. Tom explained that they had been trying to solve this problem for 3 days. The aircraft's computer systems would randomly lose communication with ground control during certain flight conditions. They had checked all the obvious components, replaced several circuit boards, and run countless diagnostic tests. But the problem persisted. "It's probably something simple," Tom said with frustration. But with all these computer systems, finding one bad connection is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Sarah asked if she could review the technical manuals and error logs. Tom handed her a thick stack of documents and pointed to a computer terminal where she could access the aircraft's diagnostic history. While Tom continued his physical inspection of the wiring, Sarah buried herself in the technical data. The error logs showed a pattern that others had missed. The communication failures always occurred when the aircraft was in specific flight attitudes and when certain other systems were operating simultaneously. Sarah realized that the problem might not be a faulty component, but rather electromagnetic interference between different systems. She spent the next 2 hours tracing wiring diagrams and studying the aircraft's layout. The F-35 was packed with electronics, and different systems were carefully separated to prevent interference. But Sarah noticed that one communication cable ran very close to a high-power radar component in a section that experienced significant vibration during flight. When Tom returned from his lunch break, Sarah shared her theory. She explained that the vibration might be causing the communication cable to move slightly, bringing it close enough to the radar component to experience interference. The problem would only occur when both systems were active and the aircraft was in certain positions that increased vibration. Tom was skeptical. "We've checked all the wiring in that area," he said. "Besides, the cables are supposed to be shielded against interference." "But what if the shielding has a small break?" Sarah asked. "Or what if the separation distance is just barely adequate, and vibration makes it inadequate?" Tom agreed to let Sarah investigate further. She carefully examined the cable routing in the area she had identified. Using a flashlight and mirror, she inspected every inch of the communication cable. Near the radar component, she found something that made her heart race. There was a tiny nick in the cable's outer shielding, barely visible, unless you knew exactly where to look. The damage was so small that it had been missed during previous inspections. Under normal conditions, this wouldn't cause problems, but when the aircraft experienced vibration and the cable moved closer to the radar component, electromagnetic interference could penetrate through the damaged shielding. Sarah called Tom over to show him her discovery. He examined the damaged cable with a magnifying glass and shook his head in amazement. "I can't believe we missed this," he said. "Good catch, rookie." Word of Sarah's discovery spread quickly through the maintenance team. Mike came over to see the damaged cable for himself. He examined Sarah's analysis and nodded approvingly. "This would have taken us weeks to find," he admitted. "Maybe months." "How did you figure it out?" Sarah explained her process, from analyzing the error logs to studying the interference patterns. Mike listened carefully, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated his own deep knowledge of aircraft systems. Robert Chen arrived just as Sarah was finishing her explanation. He had been monitoring the team's progress on this particular problem because it was holding up the aircraft's return to service. When he heard that the problem had been solved, and by the new candidate no less, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "Show me everything," Robert said. Sarah walked him through her entire analysis, from the initial review of error logs to the discovery of the damaged shielding. Robert asked detailed questions about her reasoning and methodology. He was clearly impressed by the systematic approach she had taken to solve a problem that had stumped experienced mechanics for days. The repair itself was relatively simple once the problem was identified. The damaged cable was replaced, and the new cable was routed with additional separation from the radar component to prevent future issues. Within 2 hours, the aircraft was ready for testing. As the day ended, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had proven that she belonged in this environment, but she also knew that one successful diagnosis didn't guarantee acceptance from her potential colleagues. Mike approached her as she was gathering her tools. "That was impressive work today," he said. But you should know that every day won't be like this. Sometimes we work 16-hour shifts in terrible weather. Sometimes we have to lift heavy components that would challenge any of us. This job requires more than just technical knowledge. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I understand, she said. I'm ready for whatever the job requires. Mike studied her face for a moment, then nodded. We'll see, he said. We'll see. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the day's events. She had made progress, but she sensed that her real test was still to come. The mocking comments about her toolkit still echoed in her mind, and she knew that earning genuine respect from this team would require more than solving one technical problem. She thought about her father, who had always encouraged her mechanical interests, despite societal expectations. He had taught her that tools were only as good as the knowledge and skill of the person using them. Tomorrow, she would have another chance to prove that her small toolkit was more than sufficient for the big challenges ahead. The F-35 Lightning was one of the most sophisticated machines ever built by humans, and Sarah had just demonstrated that she had the skills to keep these incredible aircraft flying. But in the competitive world of military aviation maintenance, technical competence was just the beginning. She would need to prove her worth again and again, earning respect one challenge at a time. 3 weeks into her new position at Lockheed Martin, Sarah Martinez had settled into a routine that was both challenging and rewarding. Each morning, she arrived at the hangar 30 minutes early, using the quiet time to review technical manuals and study the complex systems of the F-35 Lightning. Her colleagues had begun to acknowledge her technical skills, but full acceptance remained elusive. The maintenance team was a tight-knit group, forged by years of working together under pressure. They had their own way of doing things, their own shortcuts and techniques passed down through experience. Sarah was still the outsider, proving herself one task at a time. Mike Thompson continued to assign her increasingly complex jobs. She had successfully diagnosed several electrical problems, performed routine maintenance tasks, and even assisted with a complete engine inspection. Each success earned her grudging respect, but she could still feel the skeptical glances when she pulled out her compact toolkit. The other mechanics carried large, heavy toolboxes, filled with specialized equipment, accumulated over years of experience. Sarah's toolkit was much smaller and more carefully organized. She had selected each tool for maximum versatility and quality, but to her colleagues, the size difference was a constant reminder that she was different from them. Dave, the mechanic who had first mocked her tools, seemed particularly resistant to accepting her as an equal. He would often make subtle comments about her toy tools, or suggest that certain jobs might be too demanding for someone with her equipment. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but the constant subtle undermining was wearing on her confidence. The turning point came on a Friday afternoon when the base received an urgent priority mission. A squadron of F-35 seconds was scheduled to deploy Monday morning for a critical training exercise involving multiple branches of the military. The exercise had been planned for months, and any delays would affect hundreds of personnel and millions of dollars in coordination costs. During final pre-flight inspections, one of the aircraft developed a serious problem. The primary flight computer was showing multiple system errors, and backup systems were not functioning properly. The aircraft was grounded immediately, putting the entire mission at risk. Robert Chen called an emergency meeting with the entire maintenance team. The situation was serious. They had 48 hours to identify and fix the problem, or the squadron would deploy one aircraft short, potentially compromising the training objectives. This is not a routine maintenance issue, Robert explained. The flight computer is showing errors across multiple subsystems. Navigation, communications, weapon systems, and even basic flight controls are all affected. We need to determine if this is a computer hardware failure, a software corruption issue, or problems with the interconnected systems. Mike divided the team into groups to tackle different aspects of the investigation. Sarah was assigned to work with Tom on the electrical systems analysis. Dave and James would focus on the computer hardware, while other team members would examine the mechanical connections and run software diagnostics. The aircraft they were working on was one of the newest F-35 seconds in the fleet, equipped with the latest software updates and system modifications. This made troubleshooting more complex because there were fewer documented cases of similar problems with this specific configuration. Sarah and Tom began by accessing the aircraft's comprehensive diagnostic systems. The F-35 was designed with extensive self-monitoring capabilities, generating detailed logs of every system operation. However, the sheer volume of data was overwhelming. Thousands of error messages had been logged over the past week, many of them seemingly unrelated. "This is like drinking from a fire hose," Tom said, scrolling through pages of diagnostic data. "Half of these errors are probably secondary effects of whatever the real problem is." Sarah suggested they organize the data chronologically and look for the earliest error messages. If they could identify when the problems first started, they might be able to trace the root cause. They spent hours sorting through logs, creating timelines, and mapping error patterns. While they worked, Sarah could hear Dave and James in the adjacent work area, growing increasingly frustrated with their hardware investigation. They had removed and tested multiple computer components, but everything appeared to be functioning within normal parameters. "Maybe it's not a hardware problem," Sarah suggested during a break. "What if something is causing systematic software corruption or interfering with the computer's operations?" Dave overheard her comment and walked over. "The software is fine," he said dismissively. "We've already run full diagnostics. This is definitely a hardware issue. Probably the main processor unit. We just haven't found the right component yet. But the processor tests are showing normal results," Sarah pointed out. "And the pattern of errors suggests something is affecting multiple subsystems simultaneously. That's more consistent with an external interference source." Dave's expression hardened. "Look, rookie. We've been doing this a lot longer than you have. We know how to diagnose computer problems. Why don't you stick to your electrical system analysis and let us handle the complex stuff?" Sarah felt a flash of anger but kept her voice calm. "I'm just trying to help solve the problem. We're all working toward the same goal." "Yeah, well, some of us have the tools and experience to actually fix these birds," Dave replied, gesturing toward her small toolkit. "This isn't a job for miniature screwdrivers and good intentions." The comment stung, but Sarah returned to her work with Tom. They continued analyzing the electrical systems, looking for any anomalies that might explain the computer malfunctions. As the hours passed, Sarah began to notice subtle patterns in the data that others might have missed. The error logs showed that system malfunctions were more frequent during certain times of day and seemed to correlate with specific ground operations happening around the aircraft. Sarah realized that external electromagnetic interference might be affecting the aircraft's sensitive computer systems. Military bases are filled with powerful electronic equipment, radar systems, communication arrays, and other aircraft with their own electronic signatures. The F-35's computers were designed to operate in this environment, but Sarah wondered if something had changed recently that might be causing unexpected interference. She asked Tom if there had been any new equipment installations or changes to base operations in recent weeks. Tom thought for a moment, then remembered that a new ground-based radar system had been installed for testing purposes. The system was much more powerful than previous equipment and operated on different frequencies. "It's been running intermittent tests for about 2 weeks," Tom said. "The timing might match when these problems started." Sarah suggested they investigate the correlation between radar test schedules and aircraft error logs. If her theory was correct, they should see a clear pattern of increased errors during radar operation periods. They spent the next several hours cross-referencing data. The correlation was striking. Nearly every major system error occurred during times when the new radar system was conducting tests. The interference was subtle enough that it didn't immediately disable the aircraft's systems, but it was causing gradual software corruption and communication errors. "This is it," Tom said excitedly. "This explains everything. The interference is getting into the aircraft's electronics through some kind of shielding weakness." Sarah was already thinking about the next steps. "We need to identify exactly how the interference is getting in." and find a way to block it. The aircraft's shielding should be adequate for normal electromagnetic environments. They began a systematic inspection of the aircraft's electromagnetic shielding, paying special attention to areas where different systems connected. Sarah used her knowledge of electromagnetic interference principles to guide their search. Near the main computer compartment, Sarah discovered something that made her pulse quicken. Several shielding panels showed signs of recent maintenance, with slight gaps where panels didn't fit together perfectly. The gaps were tiny, barely visible, but potentially large enough to allow electromagnetic interference to penetrate. "Look at this," Sarah called Tom over. "These panels were removed recently, probably during the last software update. When they were reinstalled, the alignment isn't perfect." Tom examined the panels with a flashlight. "You're right. These gaps shouldn't be here. The maintenance manual specifies exact tolerances for electromagnetic shielding." They measured the gaps and compared them to technical specifications. The deviations were small, but significant. High-powered electromagnetic signals from the new radar system could potentially penetrate through these gaps and interfere with the aircraft's computer operations. Just as they were documenting their findings, Dave and James approached. They had overheard the excited conversation and came to see what had been discovered. "What's all the noise about?" Dave asked skeptically. Tom explained their theory about electromagnetic interference and showed him the shielding gaps. Dave examined the panels, but remained unconvinced. "Those gaps are tiny," he said. "There's no way that's causing all these computer problems. The real issue is definitely hardware failure. We just need to keep testing components until we find the bad one." "But look at the correlation data," Sarah insisted, showing him the charts they had created. "Every major error coincides with radar testing periods. That can't be a coincidence." "Dunning." Dave glanced at the data briefly. "Correlation doesn't prove causation," he said dismissively. "You're grasping at straws because you can't handle real hardware troubleshooting." The tension in the room was palpable. Other team members had gathered to hear the discussion, sensing the conflict between different approaches to solving the problem. Mike Thompson arrived just as the disagreement was reaching its peak. "What's the situation?" Mike asked, looking between Sarah and Dave. Both mechanics explained their theories. Dave insisted the problem was hardware-related and that they needed to continue replacing components until they found the faulty one. Sarah presented her electromagnetic interference theory, showing the correlation data and explaining the shielding gaps. Mike studied both presentations carefully. He was an experienced troubleshooter who had seen many different types of aircraft problems over his career. After several minutes of consideration, he made his decision. "We'll test both theories," he said diplomatically. "Dave, continue with your hardware investigation. Sarah, work with Tom to test your interference theory. We have limited time, so both approaches need to move quickly." Dave looked frustrated but nodded. "Fine. But we're wasting time on amateur theories when we should be focusing on proven diagnostic methods." Sarah felt the weight of the moment. If her theory was wrong, she would lose credibility with the entire team. But if she was right, it could prove that her analytical approach and attention to detail were valuable assets, regardless of the size of her toolkit. The next phase of the investigation would determine not only whether the aircraft could be repaired in time for the critical mission, but also whether Sarah would finally earn the respect of her colleagues or face further ridicule for her unconventional methods. As Saturday morning approached, the pressure intensified. The squadron's deployment was less than 36 hours away, and the aircraft remained grounded. Everything Sarah had worked for since joining the team was about to be put to the ultimate test. Saturday morning arrived with gray clouds and the weight of an approaching deadline. The F-35 Lightning remained grounded, and the squadron's Monday deployment hung in the balance. Sarah Martinez had barely slept, her mind racing through electromagnetic interference calculations and potential solutions. She arrived at the hangar before dawn, finding Mike Thompson already there, studying technical manuals by the light of a work lamp. The base was quieter on weekends, but the urgency of their mission filled the space with tension. "Any new ideas overnight?" Mike asked, as Sarah approached. "Actually, yes," Sarah replied, pulling out a notebook filled with calculations. "I've been thinking about how to test the electromagnetic interference theory definitively. We need to create a controlled test environment." Mike examined her notes, which detailed a plan to temporarily shield the aircraft from the new radar system and monitor its computer operations. If the interference theory was correct, the aircraft's systems should function normally when properly isolated from the external electromagnetic signals. "This could work," Mike said slowly. "But we'll need to coordinate with the radar testing team, and we'll need specialized shielding materials." "I already contacted the base electromagnetic compatibility lab," Sarah said. "They have portable shielding units we can borrow." The radar team agreed to run controlled tests at specific intervals. Mike looked impressed, despite himself. "You've been busy. What about Dave's hardware investigation?" "He worked until midnight replacing components," Sarah replied. "But the problems persist, even with new hardware installed." As the morning progressed, the rest of the maintenance team arrived to continue their urgent work. Dave looked tired and frustrated after his long night of component replacement. Despite installing new processor units, memory modules, and communication boards, the aircraft's computer system continued to show the same pattern of errors. "This doesn't make sense," Dave muttered as he reviewed diagnostic results. "We've replaced half the computer system, but nothing has changed." Meanwhile, Sarah and Tom worked to set up their electromagnetic testing environment. They positioned portable shielding units around the aircraft and coordinated with the radar testing team to run controlled interference tests. Robert Chen arrived mid-morning, bringing with him a palpable sense of urgency. The squadron commander had been calling for updates every few hours, and the pressure to resolve the problem was mounting. "Where do we stand?" Robert asked Mike. Mike explained the two parallel investigations. Dave's hardware approach had eliminated most component failures as possible causes, while Sarah's electromagnetic interference theory was about to undergo definitive testing. "How confident are you in the interference theory?" Robert asked Sarah directly. Sarah felt the eyes of the entire team on her. "The correlation data is very strong," she replied, "and the shielding gaps provide a plausible mechanism. But we'll know for certain within the next few hours." Robert nodded. "Proceed with the test, but have backup plans ready. If this doesn't work." The electromagnetic interference test began at noon. Sarah and Tom monitored the aircraft's computer systems, while the radar testing team operated their equipment in controlled intervals. During periods when the radar was inactive, the aircraft's computers functioned perfectly. When the high-powered radar began operating, error messages immediately began appearing in the system logs. "There it is," Tom said excitedly, pointing to real-time diagnostic data. "Look at the pattern. Errors start within seconds of radar activation." The correlation was undeniable. The aircraft's computer problems were directly caused by electromagnetic interference from the new radar system, penetrating through the inadequate shielding gaps. Sarah called Mike over to see the results. As he studied the data, his expression shifted from skepticism to understanding to admiration. "You nailed it," he said simply. "This is definitely the problem." Word of the successful test spread quickly through the team. Dave came over to see the results for himself. As he looked at the clear correlation between radar operation and computer errors, his shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't understand," he said. "How did component replacement not fix this?" Sarah explained patiently. "The components weren't actually failing. The electromagnetic interference was corrupting data and communications, making it look like hardware failures. Replacing good components with identical good components couldn't solve an external interference problem." Dave stared at the data for a long moment. Sarah could see him processing the implications, realizing that his experienced intuition had led him down the wrong path, while her analytical approach had identified the root cause. "So what's the fix?" Dave asked quietly. Sarah had been thinking about solutions, since confirming the interference problem. We need to properly seal the shielding gaps and add additional protection in vulnerable areas. I've already identified the specific panels that need adjustment. The repair process began immediately. Sarah guided the team through the precise steps needed to restore proper electromagnetic shielding. Each panel had to be carefully aligned and sealed according to strict specifications. The work required attention to detail and patience, qualities that Sarah had demonstrated consistently since joining the team. As they worked, something remarkable happened. Dave began asking Sarah technical questions about electromagnetic interference principles. His hostility had evaporated, replaced by professional curiosity about a subject where Sarah clearly had superior knowledge. "I've never dealt with this type of interference problem before," Dave admitted as they adjusted a shielding panel. "Most of our troubleshooting is mechanical or straightforward electrical issues." Sarah found herself teaching the entire team about electromagnetic compatibility principles, explaining how modern military bases with powerful electronic systems could create unexpected interference challenges for sensitive aircraft computers. The F-35 is so sophisticated that it's actually more vulnerable to certain types of interference than older aircraft, she explained. "The computer systems are incredibly powerful, but that means they're also more sensitive to external electromagnetic signals." Tom watched Sarah's impromptu technical lecture with admiration. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. "Technical college covered the fundamentals, but I've been studying advanced electromagnetic compatibility on my own," Sarah replied. "I knew that modern aircraft would face increasingly complex interference challenges." The repair work continued through Saturday afternoon and into the evening. Each shielding panel had to be precisely positioned and tested. Sarah used specialized instruments from her compact toolkit to measure electromagnetic field strengths and verify that the shielding gaps were properly sealed. Her small, carefully selected tools proved perfect for the precise work required. While her colleagues' larger toolkits contained many specialized items, Sarah's compact collection included exactly what was needed for this critical repair. "Those little tools are actually pretty impressive," James commented as he watched Sarah use a precision field strength meter. "I've never seen equipment that compact do such accurate measurements." "Quality over quantity," Sarah replied with a smile. "I spent months researching the best tools for aircraft electronics work." By Sunday morning, the shielding repairs were complete, but the team needed to run comprehensive tests to ensure the aircraft was fully operational. They coordinated with the radar testing team to run the most powerful interference tests possible, simulating the worst-case electromagnetic environment the aircraft might encounter. The results were perfect. Even under maximum radar power, the aircraft's computer systems functioned flawlessly. All error messages disappeared, and every subsystem operated within normal parameters. Robert Chen arrived for the final testing phase, bringing with him the squadron commander who wanted to personally verify the aircraft's readiness. Colonel Patricia Hawkins was a seasoned pilot with extensive F-35 experience. "Talk me through what happened and how it was fixed," Colonel Hawkins requested. Sarah found herself briefing a full colonel on the technical details of electromagnetic interference and the repair process. The colonel asked informed questions and clearly understood the complexity of the problem and solution. "Outstanding troubleshooting," Colonel Hawkins said when Sarah finished her presentation. "This type of analytical thinking is exactly what we need for these advanced aircraft systems." Mike stepped forward. "Colonel, I want you to know that Sarah identified this problem when the rest of us were focused on hardware failures. Her approach saved us days of unnecessary component replacement." One. The colonel looked at Sarah with respect. "What's your background, Technician Martinez?" "Technical college plus independent study in electromagnetic compatibility, ma'am." "I've been preparing for exactly these types of challenges." "Well, your preparation paid off. This aircraft is critical to tomorrow's mission, and you've ensured its success." As the colonel departed, the maintenance team gathered around Sarah. The atmosphere had completely changed from the skepticism and mockery she had faced just weeks earlier. Dave approached her directly. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was wrong about your tools, wrong about your experience, and wrong about your approach to troubleshooting. You saved this mission. We all saved this mission," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Your hardware investigation was important too. We eliminated component failures as a possibility, which helped confirm the interference theory." Mike called the team together for a final briefing. "This has been an excellent example of thorough troubleshooting under pressure. Sarah's analytical approach identified a problem that could have grounded this aircraft for weeks. But more importantly, we all learned something about electromagnetic interference that will make us better mechanics." As Monday morning arrived, the F-35 squadron deployed successfully for their critical training mission. The aircraft that had been grounded performed flawlessly, its computer systems operating without any interference-related errors. Sarah watched the squadron take off from the hangar doorway, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond solving a technical problem. She had proven that expertise came in many forms, that innovative thinking could be more valuable than years of experience, and that the right tools in capable hands could accomplish remarkable things. Her compact toolkit, once mocked by her colleagues, now sat proudly on her workstation alongside the tools of veteran mechanics who had learned to respect both her equipment and her abilities. The small, precisely selected instruments had been exactly what was needed to solve one of the most complex problems the team had ever encountered. Mike approached as the last aircraft disappeared into the morning sky. "You know," he said, "I think we need to update our troubleshooting procedures to include electromagnetic interference analysis. Would you be willing to develop a training program for the team?" Sarah smiled, thinking about how far she had come in just a few weeks. "I'd be honored to share what I know. And I'm sure I'll learn even more from everyone else's experience." The mocking comments about her toolkit had been replaced by requests for advice about precision instruments and analytical techniques. Sarah had transformed from an outsider trying to prove herself into a valued team member whose unique skills complemented the experience and knowledge of her colleagues. As she began planning the electromagnetic compatibility training program, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge, every skeptical comment, and every technical problem had been preparation for the day when her skills would make the difference between mission success and failure. The F-35 Lightning represented the pinnacle of aviation technology, and Sarah Martinez had proven that she belonged among the elite technicians who kept these incredible machines flying. Her success was measured not just in solved problems and repaired aircraft, but in the respect she had earned from colleagues who now saw her as an essential part of their team. The small toolkit that had once been a source of ridicule had become a symbol of precision, expertise, and innovative thinking. In the complex world of military aviation maintenance, Sarah had found her place and proven that talent, dedication, and the right approach could overcome any prejudice or preconception.